We're going to take a look at annotation today, and to me, annotation has always been something that's kind of a personal thing, that a conversation that you kind of have with the text, and it's different depending on the purpose for your annotation. So, you need to think first about your purpose for reading. If you're reading something that's literature based for an assignment, obviously you're completing some kind of analysis. The instructor is wanting you to take a look at literary elements, those kinds of things. You're going to read a text a little bit differently than you would something that maybe is nonfiction that you're reading for a science class. So you need to really think about your purpose for why you're annotating. So at a basis, annotation is kind of a way of talking with a text and writing down, what you think the author is saying, how he or she is getting their message across, and how you are reacting to what you are reading. And so today I just kind of want to take you through a sample annotation of a literary text, and I picked a short text for us here that you're actually going to see again in when we start talking a little bit about CTEs. So let's look at what I do when I annotate a text. And so the first thing that you are going to want to do is kind of preview the text. You're going to look from top to bottom. Before you ever kind of jump in and start reading, you're going to have to so I always take a look and preview the text before I start reading. I look at the size of the paragraphs. I look at the title. I look at the author's kind of overall style and the types of sentences, and I do all that before I start reading because I want to get a good idea of how the text is organized. The title sometimes is a great indicator of something important in the story, so you always kind of take a look at that and kind of try to figure out, what's the story going to be about. This one's a little vague. The flowers, it doesn't really, before reading the text, you don't really get a sense of what the story is going to be about based on the title, but we know that it's going to be important, otherwise the author wouldn't have chosen that to be the title of the story. If you're reading a nonfiction text, you're looking at headings, you're looking at the publisher, you're looking at the author and kind of what you already know about the subject before you read. And so to start my annotation, after I do my preview, my scan, I'm going to start thinking about, what it is that I want to get out of the story. Now, if it's for an assignment, I've already know what I need to get out of the story. The instructor has already told me what he or she wants me to look for. But I am just kind of cold reading this one because there's no prompt attached to this one. I just want to see what I think the author is trying to say, what I notice about the story. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at literary elements. I'm going to look at the author's choice of language, his or her diction. Well, I can just say her because it's her that's the female author. His or her diction. You're going to want to look for figurative language. Look for shifts. Always pay attention to shifts. If something starts out one way and it changes to something different, make sure that you make note of that. Something is happening. Try to identify the stages of plot. When you're a younger kid and you're in school and you're learning about the plot and mountain and how the story starts out and it builds to a climax and then ends in a resolution and a conclusion, that kind of thing. So think about those things as you're approaching literary text from a literary standpoint. So what I'm going to start off by doing is I like to use multiple colors. And obviously, you might not always have a text in front of you to actually mark up or mark on. This is what great tools like Cami, Google Classroom, Google Docs allows you to make comments on text if you want to save a document that you're reading and put it in something so you can really interact with it. Because once you annotate, you're essentially having a conversation. You're going to find that you're going to get more out of what you're reading as opposed to just going in blindly and reading and trying to jot down things that you remember after the fact. So I use multiple colors. I start off with one color that I want to use, and if something stands out to me and I know that it's related to something different, I'll swap my colors. And I always like to make notes off to the side as I'm reading, because I can come back and read those, and it aids in my understanding. So this story, The Flowers, it seemed to my eye as she skipped lightly from hen house to pig pen to smokehouse, the days had never been as beautiful as these. The air held a keenness that made her nose twitch. The harvesting of corn and cotton, peanuts and squash made each day a golden surprise that excited little tremors to run up her jaws. I already know that Mop is young based off of this initial paragraph right off the bat. How do I know that? Well, she's skipping around. She's living her best life. It's like the perfect day for her. She says that the days had never been as beautiful as these. And I made a note of that because I wanted to make sure that from the beginning that I'm aware of that. Only because she continues to reiterate it here. The harvesting of the corn and cotton made each day a golden surprise that caused excited little tremors to run up in her jaws. She's excited about this day, this perfect day that she's currently living. And so I wanted to make sure that I noted that. Mop carried a short, knobby stick. She struck out at random at chickens she liked and worked out the beat of a song on the fence around the pig pen. She felt light and good in the warm sun. She was 10, and nothing existed for her but her song. The stick clutched in her dark brown hand and the ta-titty-ta-ta of the accompaniment. I already knew she was young just based off of my initial impression from that introductory paragraph. But now I know she's 10 because the author has told me. So I want to make sure that I make a note of that. And to further kind of solidify that, she's behaving like a typical 10-year-old. Here she is. She's walking around with a stick. She's striking out at random chickens. She's working out the beat, drumming on the fence around the pig pen. She feels light and good. And you'll notice that the scenery already is so bright and alive. Like, it's golden outside. It's a golden surprise. It's obviously kind of autumn, or maybe late, or getting close to autumn, because we're seeing some changes in the harvesting and things like that. But it's beautiful outside. It's summer. It's everything is in bloom, everything is alive, and everything else. So I'm making notes of that as I'm going along. Turning her back on the rusty boards of her family sharecropper's cabin, Mop walked along the fence till it ran into the stream made by the spring. Around the spring where the family got drinking water, silver ferns and wildflowers grew. Along the shallow banks, pigs rooted. Mop watched the tiny white bubbles disrupt the thin black scale of soil and the water that silently rose and slid away down the stream. Still, everything is alive. Flowers, the water is bubbling, pigs are rooting, like all these things, this imagery, everything is alive. She had explored the woods beyond the house many times. Often in late autumn, her mother took her to gather nuts among the fallen leaves. Today, she made her own path. That stood out to me, like, just because this is something that she has not done on her own. She's creating her own path. She's going in a different direction than she normally goes in. And so for me, that is a kind of flag that something, a kind of an anticipation, maybe like a foreshadowing that, she's going in a different direction than she normally goes in. Maybe not a way that her mother had taken her before, or not a way that she had explored. But she's still happy, right? She's bouncing this way and that. And you see I'm underlining in green anytime she's acting like a child, where this typical 10-year-old behavior. In blue, I'm making notes of things that really kind of stand out to me that I want to revisit a little bit later. Vaguely keeping an eye out for snakes, she found, in addition to various common but pretty ferns and leaves, an armful of strange blue flowers with velvety ridges and sweet suds, a bush full of the brown fragrant buds. So again, she's happy. She's, she's collecting flowers for a bouquet. Still, everything is all well and good. By 12 o'clock, her arms laden with sprigs of her findings, she was a mile or more from home. She had often been as far before But the strangeness of the land made it not as pleasant as her usual haunts. It seemed gloomy in the little cove in which she found herself. The air was damp, and the silence was close and deep. We see a complete shift here from where we have this, everything is alive and golden and blooming and beautiful. And now things are starting to get kind of dark, and they're starting to get a little bit scary. She's still not scared, but it's strange to her. It's not as pleasant. It seems gloomy. The air is damp. We're starting to see a shift, a trend. And so I switched my colors just so that I could keep kind of that on track. I switched from that green when everything was light and alive to a darker color, to a darker, because I'm seeing this shift to the darkness. Ma began to circle back to the house, back to the peacefulness of the morning. She wants to get back to where she feels comfortable again. But it was then that she stepped smack into his eyes. Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between brow and nose, and she reached down quickly, unafraid, to free herself. She's still a kid. She's still not afraid. She's literally stepping into a skeleton, and she's not scared because she's naive. She's never been taught to be afraid. She may not have ever encountered anything like this before. To free herself, it was only when she saw his naked grin that she gave a little yelp of surprise. She'd probably thought it was an animal skeleton, here laying on the ground, which would not have been uncommon to come across. He'd been a tall man, from feet to neck, covered a long space. His head lay beside him. When she pushed back the leaves and layers of the earth and debris, Mop saw that he had large white teeth, all of them cracked or broken, long fingers, and very big bones. All his clothes had rotted away, except some threads of blue denim from his overalls. The buckles of the overalls had turned green. She's still not reacting in the way that we would expect her to react, a child coming across a skeleton, a relatively composed skeleton here, because there are still traces of his clothes, some denim left behind, his teeth. He'd been there for a little while, but he was not completely there's still features she's able to recognize. She's still unafraid, though. She gazed around the spot with interest. Still unafraid. She's not been taught to be afraid of what's happening. Death is a natural part of life, and we go through cycles, and so that's what's on her mind. Oh man, this man has died, and now he's here and in this beautiful spot. Very near where she'd stepped into the head was a wild pink rose. She literally reaches out to pick it up to add it to her bouquet. That's how unafraid she is. She's picking a rose out from this dead man's head, skull, bone, whatever that's still there. As she picked it to add to her bundle, she noticed a raised mound, a ring around the rose's root. It was the rotted remains of a noose, a bit of shredding plow line, now blending benignly into the soil. Around an overhanging limb of a great spreading oak clung another piece. Frayed, rotted, bleached, and frazzled, barely there, but spinning restlessly in the breeze. Mop laid down her flowers, and the summer was over. So here she is. She's walked. She's found herself in an unfamiliar place, a strange place, and we've seen that shift from lightness to darkness, and things have kind of shifted. Imagery has shifted. Diction has shifted, but she's still unafraid. She's still picking flowers all the way up until the very end. It wasn't until she saw the remains of that noose that the scene kind of has an impact for her. It's not just a man who has died and out in the woods. It's a man who has been hung out in the woods, and it is his remains. And that is kind of the awakening that she, wasn't expecting, obviously, to get. But here we are. She has become aware that there are darker and more sinister things out in the world. And this is her first, the first step that she's going to take out of childhood and out of innocence. Those last two lines, she laid down her flowers, those childlike things. that she had so before just been cherishing and these beautiful flowers. She laid them down because she's no longer a child in her mind. She's been exposed to something much darker and much deeper. And then that last line, and the summer was over. So we kind of associate in the span of life, the seasons with someone's life. You're born in the spring when all things are new. Your summer is your young days of carefree innocence where you play and everybody's out of school and you enjoy your life. And your fall is when you're an adult and you're older and you go to work and, things are, you're getting older, things are changing and you're growing. And then the winter of your life is, supposedly the last of your life and your days. And so this summer for her, this carefree innocence that she had, it is gone. It's over now that she's been exposed to something so, so startling. So that's just a sample analysis. That's the process that I use, and I hope that, it helps you understand the process a little bit better.